Hello, before you settle in, I'd truly appreciate it if you take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with what I'm sharing here. It means so much to me. Also, please share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm always touched to see how we're all coming together from across the globe. Now, let's create a calm space. Lower the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for a gentle hum, and let's begin this journey together. So you've somehow time-travelled to the 13th century. Congrats on your terrible life choices. The year is 1250-something, and you're sprawled in what the locals generously call a street, but what your modern sensibilities would classify as an open sewer. That warm puddle you're lying in? Yeah, it's exactly what you think it is. A fragrant cocktail of piss, mud, and whatever that pig over there contributed to the mix. As you drag yourself to your feet, the first thing that hits you isn't the realization that you're in another time. It's the smell. Holy shit, the smell! Imagine taking a dumpster behind a seafood restaurant in August, stuffing it with dirty gym socks, then letting a family of skunks have an orgy in it. That's the aromatic baseline of medieval existence, and you've just begun your sensory journey through this cesspit of human history. Your clothes are soaked through with mystery fluids, and you realize with growing horror that you're wearing some kind of rough-spun tunic that feels like it was made by someone whose only experience with fabric was hearing about it third-hand. No underwear, by the way. Everyone's going commando in this century. Chafing is just another word for being alive here. Look around you. This isn't the medieval world of your Renaissance fair fantasies. There are no jolly fat men in puffy shirts, no maidens fair with flower crowns, just mud shit, and people who look like they were aged in a barrel of vinegar and disappointment. Those teeth you see and the rare smiles around you. Picture corn kernels that were left out in the sun for 3 months, yellow, brown, or just straight up missing. Dental hygiene consists of occasionally swishing some ale around your mouth and hoping for the best. A child runs past you barefoot in the filth laughing. Don't let that charming sound fool you. This kid has a 50-50 shot of making it to puberty. They're playing with what appears to be a dead rat on a string. That's not some morbid game. That's the medieval equivalent of a PlayStation. Entertainment options are limited when half your siblings have already been claimed by the plague. Speaking of plagues, you've landed in a relatively calm period between major outbreaks. Lucky you. Instead of the Black Death, you only have to worry about smallpox, tuberculosis, dysentery, leprosy, and about 15 different varieties of fever that locals attribute to everything from bad air to witchcraft. That persistent cough from the woman selling turnips. Could be a cold, could be the early stages of a disease that will wipe out half the village. It's medieval roulette, and everyone's playing whether they want to or not. You stumble forward, trying to get your bearings. The street, if we can dignify this muddy track with such a term, is narrow and winding. Buildings lean toward each other like drunk friends supporting one another after a night out. They're built so close together that in some places you could reach out your arms and touch structures on both sides. This isn't quaint urban planning. It's a desperate attempt to cram as many people as possible into the protective walls of the town. Oh, those walls. They're there for a reason. Outside is a world of bandits, wolves, both the four-legged and human varieties, and rival lords who might decide your town looks ripe for a casual pillaging. Medieval Europe isn't just dirty and disease-ridden. It's a constant game of survival against forces that would very much like to separate you from your belongings, your dignity, and quite possibly your head. Your stomach growls, reminding you that time travel apparently works up an appetite. Food. You need food. But here's where your modern palate is in for a rude awakening. Forget your artisanal sourdough and cold brew coffee. The bread here is dense enough to use as a weapon. A gritty, chewy mass that contains almost as much sand and sawdust as it does actual flour. And it's probably the most appetizing thing you'll find. A tavern ahead looks promising. Well, promising might be overselling it. The wooden sign hanging crookedly above the door features a crude painting of what might be a chicken or possibly a deformed hand. Inside, the lighting is what we charitably call atmospheric, meaning you can barely see the questionable stains on the tables. The air is thick with smoke from the central fire pit, because chimneys are a luxury many can't afford. Your eyes water immediately, and you fight the urge to cough as your lungs protest this assault. The tavern keeper eyes you suspiciously. You don't look local, your accent is weird, and your general demeanour of shock and disgust marks you as an outsider. In medieval times, outsider typically translates to potential threat. or easy mark depending on how you carry yourself. Right now, with your wide eyes and gaping mouth, you're firmly in easy mark territory. What'll it be? The tavern keeper grunts, revealing a mouth with more gaps than teeth. This is your first real interaction, and it's already a minefield. You have no local currency. The coins in your pocket, if you even have any, might as well be alien artifacts here. But more importantly, you have no idea what's safe to consume. That murky liquid people are drinking from wooden cups. It could be ale, which is actually safer than water in these times. Water sources are universally contaminated with human waste and animal carcasses. Everyone knows this, which is why they drink alcohol from morning until night. Yes, everyone is in a constant state of mild intoxication, including the children. It's not bad parenting, it's survival. You mumble something about being new in town, which earns you a suspicious glare but also a grudging cup of ale slid across the sticky table. The taste makes you gag. It's warm, flat, and has chunks of something floating in it. But it's the cleanest thing you're going to put in your body today, so choke it down, time traveller. The food options are equally terrifying. Forget about the food pyramid or balanced nutrition. The medieval diet is heavily grain-based, with meat as an occasional luxury for most people. And when I say meat, I mean all of it. Intestines, brains, feet, snouts, whatever can be boiled into submission. Nothing goes to waste because nothing can afford to be wasted. That stew bubbling ominously in the corner contains parts of animals you've probably never considered edible, all swimming in a greasy broth that's been refreshed. And I use that term loosely, for possibly weeks on end. Vegetables exist primarily as sad, overcooked additions to the aforementioned stew. Fresh greens, in this economy. Unless you're eating straight from a garden in summer, you're looking at root vegetables that have been stored in cold cellars and are now sprouting interesting appendages. Fruit is seasonal and nothing like the uniform, sweet produce you're used to. That apple is small, tart, and probably has a worm living in it. Bon appétit. As you force down what passes for food, you become aware of the conversations around you. Language is another fun obstacle in your medieval adventure. Depending on where and when exactly you've landed, the locals might be speaking Middle English, which to your ear sounds like someone trying to speak English, while having a stroke and gargling marbles simultaneously. If you're in a different region, it could be Middle French, various German dialects, or any number of local languages that won't evolve into their modern forms for centuries. Even if you can understand the gist, the references and slang are completely foreign. Nobody gets your jokes about Netflix or traffic jams, and their humour revolves around subjects like the neighbour's goat eating someone's best tunic, or the priest falling asleep during his own sermon. Comedy is contextual, and your context is about 800 years off. You realise with growing dread that night is approaching. Where are you going to sleep? Hotels aren't a thing, and Airbnb is several centuries away from disrupting the medieval accommodation industry. Inns exist for travellers, but they're nothing like the quaint establishments in fantasy movies. The reality is a flea-infested straw pallet in a room shared with up to a dozen strangers, some of whom might help themselves to your belongings or your person while you sleep. And sleep itself? That's another medieval experience you're unprepared for. Forget about 8 continuous hours of rest. Medieval folks typically slept in 2 segments, first sleep and second sleep, with a period of wakefulness in between for prayer, sex, or quiet contemplation. The bed itself, if you're lucky enough to have one, is a lumpy sack stuffed with straw, or if you're fancy, wool. The pillow? Also straw. Blankets? Hope you like scratchy wool that's home to more organisms than a petri dish in a neglected lab. The tavern keeper, noting your obvious confusion and lack of funds, points you toward the church. Churches sometimes offer shelter to travellers and the destitute, though their hospitality often comes with strings attached. You'll be expected to attend services, help with chores, and listen to warnings about your immortal soul. Small price to pay for not freezing to death in a ditch, right? You stumble back into the street, which is now taking on a more ominous quality as the sun sets. Artificial lighting is in short supply in the 13th century. No street lamps, no porch lights, definitely no phone screen to navigate by. Once darkness falls, it's a special kind of black that your modern eyes have never truly experienced. Light pollution doesn't exist yet, neither does regular pollution as we know it, so there's that silver lining to your medieval cloud. The few lights you do see come from rushlights, reeds soaked in animal fat, tallow candles that smell like a rendering plant having a bad day, or the occasional oil lamp in the window of someone wealthy enough to afford it. Most people simply go to bed when it gets dark because candles are expensive and tomorrow's workday starts at dawn. As you make your way toward the looming shadow of the church, the tallest and most substantial building in most medieval towns, you pass homes that make you rethink your complaints about your studio apartment. The average medieval dwelling would give modern building inspectors an aneurysm. Walls of wattle and daub. Imagine a mix of sticks, mud, dung, and straw. Roofs of thatch that serve as luxury condominiums for mice and insects. And floors of packed earth or, if someone's feeling fancy, rough wooden planks with sizable gaps that let in drafts and small creatures. Inside these architectural nightmares, entire families, often including grandparents, parents, children, and perhaps some livestock for good measure, share a single room. Privacy is a concept that won't catch on for several more centuries. Everyone sleeps in one bed or on pallets around the central hearth, which fills the house with smoke because, again, chimneys aren't standard features yet. The smoke eventually finds its way out through a hole in the roof, but not before giving everyone's lungs a good coating of soot. The church looms ahead, a stone structure that, compared to everything around it, might as well be a skyscraper. It's probably the only building in town made of stone, a testament to the power and wealth of the medieval church. Even if you're not religious, you can appreciate the church as a rare example of something in this century that isn't actively trying to collapse, catch fire, or infect you with something. The priest who greets you is no jolly Friar Tuck. He's thin, severe, and eyes you with the wary suspicion that seems to be everyone's default expression in this century. Your strange manner of speech and obvious disorientation might mark you as touched in the head, possessed, or a heretic, none of which are good things to be in an era where unusual behaviour can lead to accusations of witchcraft or devilry. You manage to communicate enough to secure a spot in the church's modest shelter for the night. It's a hard bench in a drafty stone room, but it beats sleeping in the disease-ridden streets. As you settle in, surrounded by the genuine medieval poor, whose smell would make a modern sewer worker gag, you realise that the day is only just ending. You've survived perhaps 12 hours in the past, and already you'd trade your soul for a hot shower and a tube of toothpaste. Night falls completely, bringing with it a silence broken only by the coughs, snores, and occasional moans of your fellow lodgers. Some are sick, some are simply exhausted from days of labour that would qualify as cruel and unusual punishment in your time. There are no labour laws here, no weekends, no paid vacation. People work from sunrise to sunset, doing physical labour that would send your gym-trained body into shock. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by the bite of fleas that call your borrowed blanket home. These aren't ordinary fleas. They're medieval super fleas, carrying a buffet of diseases and apparently training for some kind of insect Olympic games involving long-distance jumping and speed drilling into human skin. You scratch reflexively, adding your own symphony of rustling and sighing to the nighttime chorus. And then there are the rats. Oh, the rats. Not the relatively clean fancy rats some people keep as pets in your time. These are disease vectors with feet. Bold, fearless creatures that scurry across the floor and sometimes across the sleeping bodies of humans too exhausted to notice or care. They're everywhere in medieval settlements, feasting on garbage, grain stores, and occasionally the toes of unwary sleepers. The Black Death might be a century away in some regions, but its carriers are already here, living their best rodent lives in the filth and darkness. Morning comes too soon, announced by the church bells that seem designed specifically to prevent anyone from sleeping past dawn. Your body aches from the hard bench, your skin itches from flea bites, and your mouth tastes like something crawled in it and died, which, given the state of medieval oral hygiene, isn't far from the truth. The other overnight guests shuffle out, heading to whatever labour awaits them. Some cast curious glances your way, perhaps wondering about this strange person who appeared from nowhere. In a community where everyone knows everyone else's business going back generations, you stick out like a smartphone at a candlelight vigil. Which brings us to another fundamental aspect of medieval life you're woefully unprepared for, the social structure. You've landed in a world where your place in society is determined almost entirely by birth. The feudal system isn't just some concept from history books. It's the rigid reality that governs every interaction and opportunity. At the top sit the nobility. Lords, ladies, knights, and the various ranks of aristocracy. They own the land, control the resources, and view the rest of humanity as essentially a different species put on earth to serve them. Below them are the clergy, who wield spiritual power and often come from noble families themselves. Then come the merchants and craftspeople in towns like the one you've landed in. Not wealthy or powerful by noble standards, but free and sometimes prosperous within their limited sphere. And then there's everyone else, the vast majority of the population who work the land as peasants or serfs. Many are essentially bound to the land they work, unable to leave without permission, forced to give a significant portion of everything they produce to their lord. It's not slavery, technically, but the distinction would feel academic if you were living it. Where do you fit in this structure? Nowhere. You have no family connections, no land, no trade, no guild membership. You're not even a proper peasant with an established place in the local manor's agricultural system. You're an unknown entity, which makes you dangerous, suspicious, and vulnerable all at once. As you step out of the church into the morning light, the practical problems of your situation become even more apparent. You need to eat, you need to earn some form of currency or barter, and you need to avoid drawing the kind of attention that leads to unpleasant accusations in a world where different often equals dangerous. Your best bet for immediate survival is finding work that requires physical labour but minimal specialised knowledge. Construction, perhaps, or helping load and unload goods at the market. The pay will be pitiful, perhaps enough for a loaf of that gritty bread and another night's lodging if you're lucky. The market square is already bustling despite the early hour. Farmers have brought in what produce is available in the season, craftspeople are setting up stalls to sell their wares, and the whole scene is chaotic, loud, and pungent. The smell of livestock mingles with human body odour, which in the medieval period is operating on a whole different level than even your most gym-averse modern acquaintance. Personal hygiene is another area where your 21st century standards are about to take a beating. Forget daily showers. Most medieval people might bathe thoroughly a handful of times per year. Water needs to be hauled from wells or rivers and heated over fires in a laborious process that makes bathing an occasional luxury rather than a daily ritual. Many believe that bathing too often is actively harmful to health, opening the pores to disease. Some monasteries even include prohibitions against bathing more than a few times annually, considering it a form of dangerous vanity. Instead of bathing, people occasionally wipe down with linen cloths, change their linen undergarments, if they're wealthy enough to have them, and rely heavily on strong scents to mask the inevitable odours. Herbs, flowers, and vinegar feature prominently in these efforts, with varying degrees of success. The overall effect is less covering up the smell, and more adding a floral note to the symphony of stench. You quickly realise that your modern sensibilities about personal space are also completely out of place. Medieval crowds pressed together in a way that would trigger anxiety in even the most extroverted modern person. People stand close when speaking. Beds are shared not just with family members, but sometimes with complete strangers at inns, and the concept of forming an orderly line is centuries away from catching on. In the market, you manage to find a merchant who needs help unloading a cart of wool. The work is back-breaking. Medieval wool comes in heavy, greasy sacks that smell like a wet sheep rolled in landfill, but it earns you a few copper coins, and more importantly, a recommendation to another merchant who needs similar help. By midday, you've earned enough for a meal, though your modern muscles are screaming in protest at being used for actual physical labour, rather than carefully curated gym exercises. Lunch is a revelation, and not in a good way. You've scraped together enough for a trencher, literally a slab of stale bread used as a plate, topped with a ladleful of the mysterious stew that seems to be on perpetual offer. The bread is so hard it could qualify as a construction material, and the stew contains chunks of something floating in greasy broth. Identifying specific ingredients would require a forensic lab and a strong stomach, but it's hot, it's filling, and it's what's available, so down it goes. As you eat, you observe the people around you with new eyes. The average medieval person is noticeably shorter than modern humans, thanks to chronic malnutrition and the kinds of childhood diseases that routinely stunted growth. Many have visible deformities or injuries that went untreated, broken bones that healed badly, burned scars, pox marks, and eyes clouded by cataracts. Their teeth, when they have them, are in states that would make a modern dentist weep. Dental care consists mainly of extraction when the pain becomes unbearable. There are rudimentary tooth cleaning tools like twigs with frayed ends used as primitive toothbrushes, but sugar is still relatively rare and expensive, so tooth decay isn't quite the epidemic it will become in later centuries. Small comfort when you're watching someone across the tavern gnaw on a piece of bread with 3 brown teeth scattered randomly across their gums like forgotten fence posts. The conversation around you turns to a recent hanging in the town square. Public executions aren't just punishments. They're entertainment in a world starved for diversion. People speak of the condemned man's final moments with the casual interest of modern folks discussing a TV show finale. Death is omnipresent here, a fact of daily life rather than a shocking intrusion. Infant mortality is so high that many parents don't even name their children until they've survived a year or more. Plague, famine, and violence can wipe out significant portions of a town's population with regularity that makes such events almost mundane. After your meal, you wander through the narrow streets, trying to get your bearings in this alien world. The town's layout follows no logical grid. It's a tangle of winding alleys and sudden dead ends, buildings constructed wherever there was space with no thought to urban planning. Navigating is done by landmarks rather than street names, which are often non-existent. Turn left at the baker with the cross-eyed daughter, then right where the big tree used to be before it fell in the storm 5 winters ago, is the kind of directions you might receive. The afternoon brings you to the town's primary water source, a well in a small square. Women gather here with wooden buckets, hauling water for cooking and what passes for cleaning. The water looks questionable at best, with visible particles floating in it, and a smell that suggests it's not far from the town's waste disposal areas. But it's what everyone drinks when they're not drinking ale, so you fill a borrowed cup and try not to think about microorganisms as you sip. The taste nearly makes you spit it back out, a mixture of minerals, organic matter, and hints of things best left uncontemplated. This is why waterborne diseases are rampant. Typhoid, dysentery, and various parasitic infections spread through water supplies contaminated by improper waste disposal. The concept of germ theory is centuries away, and the connection between dirty water and illness is understood only in the vaguest terms, if at all. As afternoon wears on toward evening, you notice a change in the town's rhythm. People begin to head home earlier than you'd expect. By the time the sun is low on the horizon, the streets are nearly empty except for the occasional guard or drunk stumbling from a tavern. Night brings dangers both practical. The almost complete darkness makes travel treacherous and superstitious. Many believe that evil spirits roam more freely after dark, and few are willing to test this theory. You've managed to secure another night at the church shelter, this time earning your spot by agreeing to help clean the sanctuary. The stone floor of the church is strewn with rushes, dried reeds that serve as a primitive carpet. Your job is to replace the old soiled rushes with fresh ones. As you clear away the old layer, you discover why this job needs doing. The rushes are filled with spit, food scraps, animal droppings from the dogs that accompany parishioners to services, and other unidentifiable filth that's been accumulating for weeks. Cleaning in the medieval sense isn't about sanitizing. It's about covering up the old dirt with a fresh layer of something that will itself become dirt. The concept of germs doesn't exist, and ideas about cleanliness are based on visible soiling and smell rather than actual hygiene as you understand it. The fresh rushes smell pleasant for now, hiding the accumulated grime beneath, and that's considered job well done. Evening prayer brings most of the town's population to the church. Religion isn't just a Sunday affair in medieval Europe. It's the central organizing principle of society and daily life. The church calendar determines work days, feast days, and most community activities. Religious observance isn't optional or personal. It's a public duty, and the failure to participate appropriately can lead to social ostracism or worse. The service itself would baffle most modern Christians. It's conducted entirely in Latin, which virtually none of the attendees understand. The priest faces away from the congregation for much of it, speaking in a low murmur to the altar. There's no congregational singing, no PowerPoint presentations of the lyrics, definitely no coffee bar in the lobby. Just incense, mysterious rituals, and occasional moments when everyone knows to kneel, stand, or make the sign of the cross based on visual cues rather than comprehension. After the service, you settle onto your bench for another night of fitful sleep, interrupted by the church bells marking the hours for prayer. Medieval Christianity divides the night into prayer periods: Vespers, Compline, Matins, Lauds. each announced by the ringing of bells. While the truly devout might rise for each of these, most ordinary people simply incorporate the sounds into their sleep cycle, briefly stirring before drifting off again. During one of these wakeful periods, you hear whispers among the other shelter seekers. There's talk of a strange illness spreading in a nearby village. The descriptions are vague but terrifying. Fever, mysterious swellings, people dying within days of showing symptoms. To your modern ears, it sounds like any number of infectious diseases that were the scourge of pre-industrial populations. To the medieval mind, it's either divine punishment or the result of bad air, evil spirits, or perhaps a witch's curse. The proposed remedies are equally alarming. Some suggest wearing pouches of herbs and spices to ward off the bad air, the theory that disease is spread by noxious vapours rather than germs. Others advocate bloodletting to restore the balance of bodily humours. Someone mentions that the bishop in a neighbouring town has ordered prayer processions where penitents whip themselves bloody to appease God's wrath. No one suggests hygiene, quarantine, or any of the measures that might actually help. You drift back to sleep with the uncomfortable knowledge that if disease does come to this town, there will be no antibiotics, no hospitals with ICUs, not even a basic understanding of what causes illness or how it spreads. A simple infected cut could kill you here, and the treatment would likely involve remedies that range from useless to actively harmful. Morning comes again, marked by the inevitable church bells and the creaking of your joints from another night on the hard bench. Your stomach growls, reminding you that maintaining even the most basic survival requires constant effort in this world. The few coins you earned yesterday are nearly gone, and you'll need to find more work to eat today. Breakfast, for most medieval people, is a simple affair, perhaps a piece of bread and some ale or cider. The concept of breakfast foods as a distinct category is largely non-existent. You eat what's available, which is usually leftovers from the previous evening or bread that's been baked in the communal ovens. Only the wealthy eat specialised morning meals, and even these would strike you as strangely heavy and lacking in fresh components. As you chew on a hunk of bread that seems to be growing more cement-like with each passing hour, you ponder your situation. The novelty of time travel has worn off rapidly, replaced by the grim reality of mere survival in this harsh world. Every aspect of life that you took for granted, clean water, abundant food, basic hygiene, medical care, even moments of privacy, is either non-existent or a rare luxury here. The day stretches ahead of you, another round of seeking work, navigating social interactions in a world where you don't know the rules, and trying to avoid the myriad ways medieval life can maim, sicken, or kill you. The romantic notion of living in a simpler time has never seemed more absurd. There's nothing simple about wrestling daily with conditions that modern humans would consider unbearable hardship. You head back to the market, hoping to find more manual labour to earn enough for another day's food. The streets are already crowded with people going about their daily business. A group of children plays in a muddy corner, their game involving what appears to be animal bones and a stick. They look up as you pass, their faces showing the effects of vitamin deficiencies and exposure to elements, skin roughened beyond their years, eyes too old for their faces. Near the market, you pass a small shop with a blood-stained apron hanging outside, the barber surgeon's establishment. In medieval times, the same person who cuts hair also performs medical procedures ranging from tooth extraction to bloodletting to primitive surgeries. The tools are simple and rarely cleaned between patients. The knowledge of anatomy is based more on tradition and superstition than actual understanding, and anesthesia consists primarily of alcohol or opium if you're lucky, nothing if you're not. You peer through the open door and immediately regret it. A man sits in a chair, gripping the arms white-knuckled as the barber surgeon probes at an infected tooth, with a metal instrument that looks more suited to horseshoeing than medical care. The patient's face is swollen on one side, the clear sign of an abscess that in your time would be treated with antibiotics and proper dental work. Here, the only solution is extraction, pulling the tooth without proper tools, sterile conditions, or effective pain management. You hurry past, trying to block out the strangled scream that follows. Medical care in the medieval period is a nightmare by modern standards. Theory still revolves around the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, which must be kept in proper balance. Treatments focus on restoring this imaginary balance through bloodletting, induced vomiting, or purging the bowels with powerful laxatives. Many remedies are worse than the diseases they purport to treat. For women, the situation is even more dire. Pregnancy and childbirth carry mortality rates that would be considered catastrophic in modern times. 1 in 3 women dies in childbirth or from complications afterward. Those who survive often face chronic health issues resulting from inadequate care during difficult deliveries. Midwives provide the best care available, using knowledge passed down through generations, but without understanding of infection control or surgical options for complications. Their skills can only go so far. Arriving at the market, you're in luck. A wealthy merchant needs help loading carts for a journey to another town. The pay is better than yesterday's work, though still pitifully small by your standards. As you lift and carry, you observe the merchant's interactions with others. The social hierarchies are instantly visible. He speaks respectfully to those of equal or higher status, dismissively to those below him, and barely acknowledges the existence of servants and labourers like yourself. This is another aspect of medieval life that would challenge modern sensibilities, the completely unquestioned nature of social inequality. The idea that all people deserve equal treatment or opportunities would be considered bizarre or even heretical. Society functions on clearly defined roles and stations, with mobility between them extremely limited. A peasant's child will almost certainly be a peasant, a noble's child, a noble. The rare exceptions only highlight how rigid the system is. The work is harder than yesterday's, involving heavier loads and more urgency. Medieval commerce operates on tight margins and strict seasonal schedules. Bad weather, bandits, or delays could mean financial ruin for merchants and hunger for towns expecting deliveries of goods. Everything moves at the speed of horse or human, making time a precious commodity in ways your on-demand, next-day delivery modern mind struggles to grasp. By midday, you've earned enough for food and perhaps a better lodging than the church bench tonight. The merchant, pleased with your work, offers you a copper coin as a bonus, a tiny amount by your standards, but a meaningful sum in an economy where many labourers earn only enough for basic subsistence. With your comparative wealth burning a hole in your pocket, you decide to seek out the local bathhouse. Yes, they do exist, though they're nothing like modern spas. Public baths are communal affairs, with large wooden tubs where multiple people soak in water that grows increasingly questionable as the day progresses. Many also offer additional services ranging from basic haircuts to prostitution, depending on the establishment's reputation. The bathhouse is a low stone building with steam rising from small windows near the roof. Inside, the air is humid and thick with the smell of wet wood, sweat, and the herbs thrown into the water to mask other odours. You pay your fee, higher than you expected, as hot water is a luxury requiring significant labour and fuel, and are directed to a changing area that offers virtually no privacy. The main bathing room contains several large wooden tubs, each filled with water in varying stages of cleanliness. Naked or nearly naked people of various ages and social classes, though rarely the highest nobility, who would have private bathing facilities, soak together, chatting and conducting business as casually as modern people might in a cafe. The concept of nudity taboo exists but is considerably different from modern standards. Practical considerations often override modesty in a world where private space is a rare luxury. You choose the least objectionable tub and lower yourself in, trying not to think about who else has used this water or what might be floating in it besides the visible herb sprigs. The heat is undeniably pleasant after days of accumulated grime, though the cleaning effect is questionable by modern standards. Without soap as you know it, medieval soap is a harsh lye-based substance primarily used for laundry, you're essentially rinsing rather than truly washing. Still, as you soak in the communal soup, you listen to the conversations around you. This is where you begin to understand the medieval information network. Without newspapers, television, or internet, news travels by word of mouth carried by merchants, pilgrims, and travellers from town to town. The accuracy of this news decreases proportionally with the distance it has travelled, transforming from factual report to wild rumour over surprisingly short distances. Today's hot topics include the illness in the neighbouring village, now described with increasingly supernatural elements, a dispute between two local lords that might lead to armed conflict, directly threatening the town's safety, and the upcoming feast day of a saint whose name you don't catch, which will apparently involve the rare luxury of community-wide consumption of meat and ale. After your bath, feeling marginally cleaner and significantly poorer, you seek out one of the better taverns for a meal that isn't primarily mystery stew. The upscale establishment has actual wooden benches instead of communal barrels to sit on. cups that appear to have been washed at some point in recent memory, and a menu offering meat pies in addition to the ubiquitous stew. The meat pie arrives looking suspiciously like a mud patty with a crust. You bite into it and immediately regret having teeth. The meat within isn't the neatly cubed beef or chicken you might expect. It's a medley of unidentifiable animal parts, gristly and chewy in places, suspiciously soft in others. The gravy tastes strongly of onions and something vaguely medicinal, probably herbs added to mask the flavour of meat that's a few days past its prime. Medieval refrigeration consists of cool cellars at best, and the concept of fresh is relative when preservatives include salt, smoke and prayer. As you force down your culinary adventure, the tavern door bangs open and a commotion erupts. A man in slightly better clothing than the average peasant, marking him as some kind of minor official, shouts for attention. The room falls silent as he unrolls a small parchment and begins to read in a formal tone that suggests he's enjoying his moment of importance. Hear ye, he proclaims, using the medieval equivalent of an email blast. By order of Lord Whatever, His Namus, all able-bodied men are required to present themselves at the town square tomorrow at dawn. His lordship requires assistance with urgent repairs to the North Road before the harvest wagons arrive. Translation: Congratulations, you've just been drafted into medieval infrastructure maintenance. This isn't a request, it's a command from the local lord, who essentially owns everyone who lives on his lands. Refusal isn't an option unless you're a fan of dungeons, which in this century are less misunderstood Gothic aesthetic and more damp hole where you'll die of sepsis from rat bites. The announcement causes grumbling around the tavern, but it's the resigned grumbling of people who know they have no choice. Medieval peasants and townsfolk owe labour service to their lords, a certain number of days each year when they must drop their own work to serve at the lord's pleasure. It's taxation in the form of sweat and blisters rather than money. You look around and realise that you too will be expected to show up. Your status as a stranger won't exempt you. If anything, it makes compliance more crucial to avoid unwanted attention. Besides, a day of road work might mean food provided by the Lord's kitchens, which could be a step up from tavern mystery meat. Night is falling again as you leave the tavern, and you decide to splurge on an actual inn rather than another church bench. The inn turns out to be the attic space above a stable, accessed by a ladder that creaks ominously with each step. The sleeping area is a long room with straw pallets laid side by side on the floor. Privacy consists of imaginary lines between your pallet and your neighbours. The smell of horses drifts up through the wooden floor, mingling with the unmistakable aroma of human bodies in various states of filth. For this luxury accommodation, you pay nearly half your day's earnings. The innkeeper looks at your remaining coins with naked avarice, but doesn't quite dare to demand more. You stake your claim on a pallet that looks marginally less flea-ridden than its neighbours, and settle in for the night, using your bundled tunic as a pillow since actual pillows are apparently an unreasonable expectation. Sleep comes surprisingly quickly, a testament to physical exhaustion overriding mental discomfort. But it doesn't last. You're jolted awake by screaming in the street below. Fire, the persistent nightmare of medieval towns, has broken out in a building nearby. The cry of fire carries more terror than any other alarm in a world where buildings are made of wood, thatch, and other highly combustible materials, where water must be hauled bucket by bucket from wells, and where a single blaze can consume an entire town in hours. You join the chaos in the street, finding yourself drafted into a bucket brigade, a line of people passing water from the nearest well to the burning building. The fire roars, terrifyingly bright in the medieval darkness. Sparks float upward, threatening to spread the blaze to neighbouring structures whose thatched roofs might as well be labelled premium kindling. Firefighting in this era is desperate, primitive, and often futile. There are no fire departments, no hydrants, no specialised equipment beyond buckets and perhaps hooks to pull down buildings in the fire's path to create fire breaks. The best strategy is often to focus on containing the spread rather than saving what's already burning. The family who lived in the now burning house stands nearby, the children crying, the adults stunned into silence. They're watching everything they own, which isn't much by modern standards but represents their entire lives, turn to ash. There's no insurance, no emergency housing, no FEMA disaster relief. Their neighbours might take them in temporarily or help rebuild if the community is particularly tight-knit, but there's no system in place to ensure they don't end up destitute and homeless. After hours of exhausting work, the fire is finally contained. 2 buildings are complete losses, and a third is damaged. Miraculously, no one died, though an elderly man is suffering from smoke inhalation, treated by neighbours with folk remedies of questionable efficacy. You stagger back to the inn, reeking of smoke, only to find your pallet taken by someone else in the confusion. Too tired to argue, you slump against a wall and drift into uneasy sleep sitting up. Dawn comes with the customary church bells and an ache in every muscle you possess. Your borrowed clothes are filthy, smoky and torn in places from the night's exertions. But there's no time to worry about that. You're expected at the town square for road duty, and tardiness would not be viewed kindly. The square is already filling with men of varying ages, all looking about as thrilled as you might expect from people being forced into unpaid labour. A man on horseback, some minor noble or steward from the Lord's household, surveys the assembled workforce with the expression of someone who stepped in something unpleasant. He's clearly not impressed with the human resources available to him, but will make do with what he has. Instructions are shouted, tools are distributed, and you find yourself handed a shovel that appears to have been made by someone whose understanding of ergonomics began and ended with, "It should have a handle." The worksite is a mile outside town, a section of road damaged by recent rains. Road is a generous term for what is essentially a dirt path wider than others, rutted by cartwheels and pockmarked with puddles. The work is back-breaking. Digging drainage ditches, hauling stones to fill holes, compacting earth with crude tools, all under the medieval summer sun that beats down without mercy. There are no water breaks, no safety regulations, no hard hats or steel-toed boots. When a man nearby slices his hand open on a sharp stone, he simply wraps it in a dirty strip of cloth and continues working. Infection is a tomorrow problem, and tomorrow is never guaranteed anyway. Lunch is provided as you'd hoped: bread, cheese and small beer, a low-alcohol brew safer than water. The food disappears in minutes into the bellies of men burning thousands of calories in hard labour. The overseer allows precisely enough time to eat before bellowing for work to resume. As you dig, you chat with the man next to you, partly to pass the time, partly to learn more about this world you're trapped in. He's a tanner's apprentice, as evidenced by the permanent stench of urine and animal hides that surrounds him like an aura. Tanning leather involves soaking skins in vats of stale urine and feces, among other delightful substances, making it one of the most reviled professions. Tanners typically live on the outskirts of towns because nobody wants to be downwind of their workshops. "Heard about the sickness in Northfield?" he asks between shovel strokes. "7 dead already. They say the victims turn black before the end." Great. Nothing like the possibility of bubonic plague to brighten your medieval experience. The disease won't get its Black Death nickname for another century in some regions, but various strains of plague are already making occasional appearances across Europe. "My cousin's wife's brother was there last market day," the tanner continues, demonstrating the medieval version of "I read it on the internet." Says they're blaming the miller's boy who came back from pilgrimage last month. Always the travellers bringing trouble. He gives you a sidelong glance, suddenly remembering you're an outsider yourself. You mumble something non-committal and dig faster, trying to look extremely busy and definitely not plague-ridden. Medieval disease control consisted primarily of accusing newcomers, minorities, or social outcasts of spreading illness, often with violent consequences. The last thing you need is to become the local scapegoat for an outbreak of anything from measles to ergot poisoning. The road work continues until dusk, by which time your hands are blistered, your back feels permanently bent, and you've developed a new appreciation for modern construction equipment. The overseer dismisses the workers with casual contempt, reminding you that another day of service will be required next week, something to look forward to. You trudge back to town with the others, too exhausted for conversation. Your payment for the day's labour is merely the food provided and the privilege of not being punished for refusing to serve. Welcome to medieval economics, where much of the population works not for wages but to fulfill obligations to their social superiors. The next few days fall into a grim pattern of seeking odd jobs, scraping together enough coins for food and shelter, and discovering new ways in which medieval life is designed to break both body and spirit. You help a chandler dip tallow candles, gagging on the smell of rendered animal fat. You assist a fuller in trampling newly woven cloth in vats of stale urine to clean and thicken it. You even spend a day as a turnspit boy in a tavern kitchen, turning a spit over a fire so hot it blisters your face, while grease spatters your arms. Each job offers a window into an aspect of medieval life that history books tend to gloss over. The unrelenting physical toll, the constant exposure to substances that would trigger a hazmat response in your time, the casual cruelty, not from deliberate malice, but from a society where individual suffering is unremarkable and expendable. Human labour is the primary energy source. A week into your time travel nightmare, something changes. The whispers about sickness in neighbouring villages grow more frequent, more urgent. The town guard begins stopping travellers at the gates, questioning them closely about where they've been and turning away those who mention coming from affected areas. The priest adds special prayers to services, asking God to spare the town from the spreading contagion. You recognise the signs of a pandemic in its early stages. Without germ theory, antibiotics, vaccines, or effective quarantine procedures, medieval communities were almost defenceless against infectious disease. Their only real strategy was isolation, cutting themselves off from the outside world and hoping the plague would pass them by. Sometimes it worked, often it didn't. The growing crisis creates a new opportunity. The town's officials are calling for volunteers to serve as messengers between isolated communities, carrying news and urgent communications. It's dangerous work. Travelling medieval roads alone is risky at the best of times, potentially deadly during disease outbreaks. But it offers something you desperately need: mobility and purpose beyond day-to-day survival. You volunteer, partly from a desire to be useful, partly from the promise of actual payment rather than subsistence wages. The town clerk, a rare literate person who handles official correspondence, eyes you skeptically, but is in no position to refuse able bodies. While you can't read or write medieval script, you can memorize verbal messages and at least recognize which sealed letter goes to which recipient. They outfit you with a crude map drawn on scraped parchment vellum, literally animal skin, a small pouch of coins for expenses, and a wooden staff marked with the town's seal to identify you as an official messenger. It's not much, but it's the medieval equivalent of diplomatic credentials. Your first assignment sends you to a monastery 3 villages away, a journey of about a day on foot. The monastery needs to be informed about which roads are being closed due to the spreading illness, and which alternative routes remain safe for the monks who travel collecting alms and distributing charity. You set out at dawn, joining the trickle of travellers, merchants and pilgrims who brave the roads despite the dangers. Medieval roads are nothing like modern highways. They're muddy tracks at best, often poorly marked, frequently impassable after rain. Many follow ancient Roman routes or simply the paths of least resistance through the landscape. Without proper maps or signage, travellers rely on landmarks, local knowledge, and the occasional roadside cross or shrine to stay on course. The dangers are numerous and varied. Bandits lurk in wooded areas, preying on isolated travellers. Wild animals, wolves in particular, pose a genuine threat, especially in winter when food is scarce. Then there are the natural hazards. Unmarked bogs where the unwary might sink and drown, rivers that must be forded without bridges, rock slides on mountain paths. Add to these the human threats of war, civil unrest, and the simple fact that a stranger on the road might be anyone from a fugitive criminal to a diseased carrier of the latest plague. Your first day of travel passes without major incident, though the strain of walking on uneven ground in medieval footwear, thin leather shoes with minimal support, leaves you with blisters that would make a marathon runner wince. You reach a village by nightfall and seek lodging at the local inn, a structure somehow even more ramshackle than the one in the town you left. The innkeeper's suspicion of outsiders has been amplified by news of the spreading illness. He demands to see your credentials, scrutinizing the town seal with exaggerated care before grudgingly offering you a space in the common room, essentially the floor near the hearth, to be shared with whoever else needs shelter for the night. Your status as an official messenger earns you a bowl of pottage, a thick soup of whatever vegetables were available, with barley and perhaps a few precious shreds of meat if you're lucky. The common room serves as a medieval information exchange. Travellers share news from their home regions, merchants discuss prices and trade conditions, locals complain about taxes and weather. You listen carefully, building a mental map of which areas are affected by illness, which roads are considered unsafe, which local lords are raising militias for some petty conflict. This kind of practical intelligence isn't found in historical records, but would be essential knowledge for anyone trying to survive day to day. You learn that the monastery you're heading to has its own problems, A dispute with the local lord over land rights has escalated to the point where armed men have threatened the monks. The messenger who brought this news seems worried that violence might erupt before any peaceful resolution can be reached. Medieval land disputes were deadly serious. Land was the primary source of wealth and power, and conflicts over it could simmer for generations, occasionally boiling over into bloodshed. Sleep comes fitfully on the hard floor, interrupted by the snores, coughs, and occasional drunken mumblings of your roommates for the night. You rise before dawn, eager to reach the monastery before nightfall. The innkeeper sells you a hunk of bread for breakfast, at an inflated price for outsiders, naturally. And you're back on the road as the sky lightens. The terrain grows more difficult as you travel, the path narrowing as it winds through increasingly dense forest. The tree canopy blocks much of the light, creating an eerie green twilight even at midday. The sounds of civilization fade, replaced by the calls of birds and the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth. Medieval forests were not the managed woodlands of later centuries, but wild, primeval places where humans were very much intruders. Around midday you hear the snap of a branch behind you. Too heavy to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. Bandits. The threat every medieval traveller dreaded. You grip your staff tighter, knowing it's a poor weapon against whatever these forest predators might carry. But it's all you have. 3 men step onto the path ahead, blocking your way. They're dressed in ragged clothing, armed with crude weapons, a rusty sword, a woodsman's axe, a heavy club. Their expression suggests this is not a chance meeting, and their intentions don't include wishing you a pleasant journey. Road toll, the largest one grunts, holding out a dirt-encrusted hand. Pay or turn back. It's a transparent pretext. There is no road toll, just 3 desperate men who've chosen highway robbery over starvation. In a world with no social safety net, no unemployment benefits, and limited opportunities for honest work, banditry was sometimes the only alternative to slow death for those who fell through society's cracks. You explain your status as an official messenger, showing the town's seal on your staff. This gives them pause. Attacking a random traveller is one thing, interfering with official business is another, potentially carrying heavier penalties if they're caught. But hunger and desperation make people bold, and your pouch of coins has not escaped their notice. Messenger, eh? The leader spits to one side. Then you won't mind sharing some news along with your purse. We're reasonable men. Medieval negotiation at its finest. They want your money, but are offering a face-saving compromise that doesn't technically count as robbing an official. You size up your options. Fighting is suicidal against 3 armed men. Running through dense forest in medieval footwear is a recipe for a broken ankle, and your mission isn't worth dying for. You reluctantly hand over half your coins, keeping enough hidden to complete your journey, and share what non-sensitive information you can about the towns you've passed through. The bandits accept this compromise with surprising courtesy. In a twisted way, there's a code of conduct even among thieves. Complete destitution of a victim serves no one in a world where today's traveller might be tomorrow's customer, informant or employer. They let you pass, and you continue toward the monastery with a lighter purse and a deeper understanding of medieval justice, functioning less through formal systems than through situation-specific negotiations of power, need, and pragmatism. The monastery appears in late afternoon, a collection of stone buildings surrounded by a low wall, set in a clearing backed by hills. Unlike the ramshackle wooden structures of villages, monasteries were built to last, their stone construction a physical manifestation of the church's permanence and power. Many would indeed survive centuries, outlasting the political entities around them. The porter at the gate examines your credentials and directs you to the guest house, where travellers can find lodging according to their status. As an official messenger, you rank above common pilgrims but below nobility or high clergy. This entitles you to a small private room rather than a space in the dormitory, a luxury beyond anything you've experienced since arriving in this century. The monk who shows you to your quarters explains that the evening meal will be served after Vespers, the evening prayer service. Monasteries operated on their own rigorous schedule, organised around 8 daily prayer services beginning with matins in the early morning hours and ending with Compline before sleep. All activities, including meals, work and hosting guests, were fitted around this spiritual framework. Your room is sparse by modern standards, but feels like a 5-star hotel compared to floor pallets and church benches. A narrow bed with a straw mattress covered in linen, A small table with a candle, a wooden cross on the wall, and, miracle of miracles, a chamber pot for nighttime needs. There's even a small basin of water for washing, though it's cold and there's no soap as you would recognise it. The evening meal in the refectory, dining hall, is simple but superior to anything you've eaten since arriving in this time. Monastery food was generally better than average medieval fare, partly because monasteries owned the best agricultural land, partly because they had the organisation and resources for proper food storage and preparation, and partly because feeding guests well was considered an important part of the monastic mission of hospitality. Still, don't expect anything resembling modern cuisine. The meal consists of bread significantly less gritty than what you've become accustomed to, a vegetable pottage seasoned with herbs from the monastery garden, some cheese that isn't actively growing new life forms, and small beer. Meat is absent, as this isn't a feast day when such indulgences would be permitted. The monks eat in silence while one of their brothers reads aloud from religious texts, a practice meant to feed the soul while the body is nourished. After delivering your messages to the abbot, you're free to retire to your room, a privacy so complete that it feels almost disorienting after days of constant human proximity. Medieval people were rarely alone. They slept in shared beds, worked in communal settings, even relieved themselves in multiple seat latrines without partitions. Privacy was not an expectation or a right, but an unusual luxury reserved for the elite or, as in monasteries, those who had taken religious vows requiring periods of solitude for prayer and contemplation. The monastery offers a glimpse of the best living conditions the medieval world could provide. The buildings are solidly constructed and reasonably clean by period standards. The community is organised, with each member having specific duties and sufficient resources for basic needs. The routine of prayer, work, and rest provides structure in a world otherwise ruled by the chaotic forces of nature, disease, and human conflict. But even here, you notice the limitations. The corridors are dark except for occasional rushlights. The stone walls hold the day's heat in summer and the night's cold in winter. Water must still be hauled from wells, waste disposed of in primitive systems. The monks' faces show the same signs of nutritional deficiencies and untreated ailments you've seen elsewhere, though perhaps to a lesser degree. And the isolation that provides security also breeds insularity. The monastery exists in a bubble of relative stability, while the outside world roils with change and struggle. You spend 3 days at the monastery, waiting for return messages to carry back to your town. During this time, you observe the rhythm of monastic life, the pre-dawn prayers, the carefully divided hours of labour in fields, kitchens and scripturia, writing rooms, the strict hierarchies that govern every interaction. It's a life of profound limitations, but also of security and purpose that few outside the church walls could claim. On your 4th morning, you're given sealed parchments to carry back, along with verbal messages too sensitive to commit to writing. The return journey feels different. You're now a seasoned medieval traveller, your feet toughened, your senses attuned to the potential dangers of the road. You avoid the stretch of forest where you encountered bandits, taking a longer but safer route through more populated areas. As you approach your adopted town, you notice unusual activity at the gates. Guards are turning away all travellers, allowing only residents to enter after careful questioning. Your status as an official messenger grants you passage, but the atmosphere inside the walls is tense. The illness has arrived despite all precautions, claiming its first victims in the poorest section of town. The response is predictably medieval and predictably inadequate. Houses where sickness has appeared are marked with crosses, their inhabitants forbidden to leave, a crude quarantine that often doomed the healthy along with the sick. The church overflows with supplicants praying for divine intervention. Rumours spread about possible causes: contaminated wells, Jewish poisoners, miasma from the tanneries, divine punishment for insufficient piety. None come close to identifying the actual vectors of disease: fleas, contaminated water, or person-to-person contact. You deliver your messages to the town clerk, who receives them with distracted urgency. He has more pressing concerns than monastic land disputes, now that death stalks the narrow streets. But your service has proven valuable, and he offers you continued employment as the situation worsens. Messengers will be needed more than ever if the town becomes truly isolated by fear and contagion. And so you find yourself with an established place in this medieval world that initially seemed so alien. You're still an outsider, still viewed with suspicion by many, but you have a function, an income of sorts, and something approaching respect in limited circles. You've learned to navigate the physical and social landscape well enough to survive from day to day. But survival is all it is. As weeks turn to months, you realize the grinding nature of medieval existence doesn't improve with familiarity. Every aspect of daily life remains a struggle against dirt, disease, discomfort, and the constant spectre of sudden death. The simplest modern conveniences, running water, flush toilets, refrigeration, antibiotics, would be miracle-working magic here. Even the wealthiest medieval noble lived in conditions a modern person would consider primitive camping at best, abject squalor at worst. The outbreak of illness eventually subsides, having claimed perhaps 50 lives in a town of a few thousand. A tragedy by modern standards, but a relatively minor event in a world accustomed to death's constant presence. Life resumes its medieval normal, the daily struggle for subsistence, punctuated by religious festivals that offer brief respite from labour and hardship. As autumn approaches, you observe the increasing urgency of harvest preparations. In an agricultural society without modern food preservation and transportation, winter is an annual crisis that must be prepared for meticulously. Grain must be harvested, threshed, and stored. Fruits must be dried, vegetables pickled, meat smoked or salted. Firewood must be stockpiled, clothing repaired, roofs checked for leaks. Every household, from peasant hut to noble manor, engages in this frenzy of winter preparation. The harvest itself is a community effort that makes your earlier experience with road repair look like a casual afternoon project. Every able body is pressed into service in the fields from dawn to dusk. Children as young as 5 or 6 carry water and food to workers. The elderly oversee threshing and winnowing. For a few weeks, all other activities, even church services, are abbreviated to maximize working hours while daylight lasts. The physical toll is immense. People work until they collapse, sleep briefly, then rise to work again. Injuries are common. Scythes and sickles are unforgiving tools, but there's no stopping until every last grain is safely stored. A family's survival through winter depends on these crucial weeks, and medieval people knew all too well the consequences of failed harvests. The famine months of spring when food stores run low, the children's swollen bellies from malnutrition, the elderly who take to their beds during winter's depths and never rise again. You take part in this collective effort. Your messenger duties temporarily suspended while every hand turns to the harvest. The work is backbreaking but offers a sense of community and purpose, unlike anything you've experienced in this time. For once, social distinctions blur slightly in the face of shared necessity. The Lord Steward works alongside peasants. The priest rolls up his sleeves to bind sheaves. The town's craftspeople leave their workshops to help in the fields. The harvest festival that follows provides the first genuine celebration you've witnessed. For one night, food is abundant. Ale flows freely and music fills the town square. People who have worked to the point of exhaustion find energy for dancing and laughter. Even the ever-present smells of medieval life seem masked by the aroma of fresh bread and roasting meat. But the festivities are brief. One night of revelry before the grim reality of approaching winter sets in. You've heard enough to know what's coming. Months of darkness broken only by rushlights and candles, too precious to burn for mere comfort. Cold that penetrates stone walls and wooden frames alike. The monotony of winter diet. Salted meat, dried peas, ale and bread more suitable for construction than consumption. The persistent cough that affects nearly everyone as smoke from inadequate heating and cooking fires fills tight living quarters. And yet, as you look around at the people swaying to the simple music of pipes and drums, faces flushed with ale and momentary happiness, you realize something unexpected. They endure. Not with noble stoicism or poetic suffering, but with a stubborn, matter-of-fact resilience. This grinding existence, that to you feels like a survival challenge from some reality show from hell, is simply life to them. They don't know about antibiotics or indoor plumbing or food safety regulations. They don't expect comfort or fairness or long life expectancy. They take what joy they can in moments like this harvest celebration, then wake the next day to continue the endless work of medieval survival. You've survived months in a time that would kill most modern humans within days. You've adapted, learned skills no history book could teach, found a place, however tenuous, in a world utterly foreign to your experience. But you've also seen the truth behind the romantic myths of medieval life. experienced firsthand the grinding physical reality that shaped history's nameless millions. As winter's first chill touches the harvest festival night, you lift a wooden cup of ale in a silent toast to everyone around you. The medieval men, women and children who don't know they're living in the dark ages, who don't realise that centuries later, people will look back at their lives as primitive and their deaths as statistics. They're just living the only reality they know, one day at a time, finding moments of warmth and connection in a world colder and darker than your own in ways that go beyond the absence of electricity. And perhaps, you think as you drain your ale, there's something like wisdom in that after all. Not that you'd ever want to test that theory for longer than absolutely necessary. Medieval Europe can keep its plague-ridden, shit-covered, tooth-rotting, back-breaking authenticity. You've had more than enough immersion in this historical cesspool. You'd trade your left kidney for a hot shower, antibiotics, and a hamburger that wasn't made from mystery meat. But until that miraculous return to modern comforts happens, you'll do what humans have done throughout history. Endure, adapt, find moments of connection, and even humour in the absurd tragedy of existence. Because whether it's the 13th century or the 21st, that's what survival looks like. Putting one foot in front of the other, preferably avoiding the bigger piles of excrement along the way, both literal and figurative, and maybe, just maybe, developing a newfound appreciation for toilet paper, dentistry, and the miracle of not dying from a paper cut. The past might be a foreign country, but it's one with truly shitty tourist amenities. Next time you're sticking to the Renaissance Fair version, same costumes, way fewer parasites. Meanwhile, in the real world where you're actually lying comfortably in bed listening to this sleep story, perhaps there's a small smile on your face as you drift off to sleep, grateful for the antibiotics in your medicine cabinet, the flush toilet down the hall, and the refrigerator humming quietly in your kitchen. Sweet dreams, time traveller. Your medieval adventure may continue in your dreams, but you'll wake to the miraculous comfort of the present, indoor plumbing and all. The end.